Gold is often thought of simply as a metal, but the truth is, it cold be the key to a major economic shift that most people are unaware of. The United States is currently grappling with a staggering $37 trillion debt, and it spends over $1.2 trillion each year just to service the interest on that debt. The financial situation is clearly broken, and there's only one route left to avoid a complete collapse of the system. This path is already in motion, hidden inside a document that has caught the attention of many, but for all the wrong reasons. A few days ago, you likely saw the headlines: Trump signs strategic Bitcoin reserve order. This caused a rally in crypto markets, and social media influencers jumped to celebrate the future of digital currencies. But while all eyes were on Bitcoin, the real story was buried within the same document, one that most people overlooked. That document isn't just about Bitcoin, it's about the legal framework for a massive wealth transfer, potentially the largest in U.S. history. In fact, the $20 trillion mistake made by the media was assuming the order was about Bitcoin. It's not. It's about strategic reserve assets, a term that, while including cryptocurrencies, also clearly points to one key asset: gold. Why does the term strategic reserve assets matter so much? Because this isn't the first time we've seen a government use similar language. In 1933, during the Great Depression, President Franklin Roosevelt didn't announce that he was going to seize Americans' wealth to prevent government bankruptcy. Instead, he told the public that he was acting against hoarding during a national emergency, using vague language to justify the seizure of private property. The language in the recent order signed by Trump is eerily similar. It grants the Treasury the authority to acquire, manage, and assign value to these assets for national security purposes. And when the national debt reaches $40 trillion, solvency itself becomes a matter of national security. The real story here isn't just the establishment of a Bitcoin reserve, it's the construction of a legal mechanism to revalue gold. By making Bitcoin the headline, the government managed to pass this legislation without sparking panic, creating a bridge from a bankrupt dollar to a more stable asset: gold. In the end, it's not about cryptocurrencies, it's about gold. To understand how this will work, let's take a closer look at something the government doesn't often discuss: the gold certificate account. This is the key to understanding how the U.S. Treasury can resolve the $37 trillion debt without incurring any additional borrowing costs. Under the Federal Reserve Act, the government has the ability to essentially print money without borrowing a single cent. How? Through gold certificates, which represent the Treasury's gold holdings. Currently, the U.S. Treasury holds about 261 million ounces of gold, but the value of this gold has been stuck at $42.22 per ounce since 1973. On paper, this gold is worth a paltry $11 billion. However, the Treasury's gold certificates, which are held by the Federal Reserve, could be revalued. If the President declares a national economic emergency and the Treasury decides to revalue this gold to market prices, the entire equation changes. Let's say the price per ounce jumps to $20,000. The value of the gold on the Treasury's books would skyrocket from $11 billion to roughly $5.2 trillion. But here's the important part: the government doesn't need to sell any of this gold to access its newfound value. Instead, they simply issue more gold certificates to match the new value, which the Federal Reserve must accept by law. The Treasury would then credit its account with the cash equivalent of the new gold value, without creating any new debt. This would instantly reduce the national debt by up to 15% in a single afternoon. The debt doesn't disappear, it's simply restructured. The government is effectively able to print money backed by gold, and the media and public, focused on Bitcoin, miss the far-reaching implications of this revaluation. Why $20,000 per ounce? That price isn't random, it's the result of a very specific financial equation. To explain, let's break down the United States monetary base. This includes physical cash and the reserves banks hold at the Federal Reserve, which total about $5.5 trillion. To stabilize the US dollar and restore global confidence, the government needs to show that every dollar in circulation is backed by a tangible asset. The only way to do this is by revaluing gold to match the monetary base. When you divide the monetary base by the amount of gold in U.S. reserves, 261 million ounces, you arrive at a price of $20,000 per ounce. This is not a speculative target. It's the price necessary to fully collateralize the U.S. dollar. What this means is that the government has found a way to restore the dollar's value without printing more paper money or borrowing from other nations. By revaluing gold, they can create new equity for the Treasury without triggering inflation or bond market chaos. This process, hidden in plain sight, could be the solution to the nation's crippling debt crisis. So the next time you hear about Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, remember this: they're part of the distraction, a cover story to help pass legislation that will revalue gold. And when that happens, the financial world as we know it will change forever. Gold has long been seen as a valuable asset, but what if it's also the key to a major shift in the global financial system? The reality is, we're on the verge of a significant economic change. The United States is currently facing a massive $37 trillion debt and spends over $1.2 trillion every year just to service the interest. The financial system is broken, and there may only be one way out that doesn't result in total collapse. While many are distracted by the latest headlines about cryptocurrencies, something far more important is happening under the surface. And it has happened before. Back in 1933, during the Great Depression, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. History books often tell us this was an emergency measure to stop citizens from hoarding gold. But the truth is much darker. The government wasn't just trying to stop hoarding, it was planning the greatest wealth transfer in history. This blueprint is nearly 90 years old, and the government is rolling it out again today. Here's how it happened in 1933. The government forced every American to turn in their gold coins and bullion. If you complied, you were paid the official statutory price of $20.67 per ounce. People trusted their government and handed over their gold. But just 9 months later, Roosevelt signed the Gold Reserve Act, which transferred ownership of all that gold to the U.S. Treasury. The next day, Roosevelt revalued gold from $20.67 per ounce to $35 per ounce. This was an immediate 69% increase in gold's value, and the government took all of the profit. It wasn't given to the citizens who handed over their gold, it was kept by the government. This move generated $2.8 billion in profit for the Treasury, a sum worth hundreds of billions in today's dollars. This windfall was funneled into a secret fund called the Exchange Stabilization Fund, ESF, which still exists today, operating without any congressional oversight. The confiscation of gold in 1933 wasn't a mistake. It was the government's plan to devalue the dollar and transfer wealth to the state. It's a historical precedent that we need to pay attention to now. The financial setup today is remarkably similar to what happened in 1933. The mechanics are slightly different, but the goal is the same: to use gold to stabilize the dollar, revalue assets, and clean up the balance sheets. The government is once again looking at a massive revaluation of gold. But this time, it's not for $2.8 billion, it's to shore up $5 trillion. Just like in 1933, they need you to be out of the market before the revaluation happens. They need to control the gold when the price resets. And the global banking system is quietly preparing for this reset. You might think it's impossible for banks to accept such a drastic revaluation of gold, but in reality, the banks have already set the stage. 3 years ago, a global banking regulation called Basel III went into full effect, but it wasn't widely discussed. This regulation reclassified gold from a risky asset, like a speculative stock or junk bond, to a Tier 1 asset, the same classification as cash and used treasury bonds. Tier 1 assets are considered risk-free and highly secure. By making gold a Tier 1 asset, banks can now use it to shore up their balance sheets. Why would they do this? Because they know that when the price of gold jumps to $20,000 per ounce, it will instantly solve liquidity problems. With gold now considered equivalent to cash, the banking system can reclassify its gold holdings to make their balance sheets appear strong again. They've prepared the financial system so that when gold is revalued, it won't cause a crash, it will stabilize the banks. The revaluation of gold is not just about protecting the dollar, it's about saving the banks that are too big to fail. But here's the catch. If you think you own gold through an ETF, exchange-traded fund, or futures contracts, you're mistaken. These financial products don't represent actual gold. They are simply paper claims to gold that may not exist in physical form. The gold market is a fractional reserve system, meaning for every ounce of gold that actually exists, there are hundreds of paper ounces being traded. When the price of gold is revalued, this paper market is going to collapse. Let's say you're a bank that sold 10 million ounces of gold short, meaning you promised to deliver physical gold at a certain price, but you don't actually have the gold. When the price jumps to $20,000 per ounce, The bank will instantly be insolvent because it owes billions of dollars it doesn't have. To cover its position, the bank must buy physical gold, but there's a problem. The demand for physical gold will skyrocket, and no one will be willing to sell their gold at the old price. This is known as a short squeeze, and it will force the price even higher. But the biggest issue comes for those holding gold through ETFs and paper contracts. When this happens, exchanges will declare something called force majeure, meaning they cannot deliver physical gold due to market conditions. If you're holding paper gold in your brokerage account, you will be paid out in cash at the last official settlement price, not the new revalued price. While physical gold may be worth $20,000 or more, you'll get a fraction of that value because the market will be settled in dollars currency that is rapidly losing value. And if you think you can avoid this by keeping your gold in a safe deposit box at the bank, think again. In 1933, Roosevelt didn't just rely on voluntary compliance. The government issued an order to banks to seal up safe deposit boxes. If you had gold in your safe deposit box, an agent from the IRS was standing there to seize it. Today, safe deposit boxes are still not a guaranteed private sanctuary. If the government decides to seize assets again, don't think your gold will be safe in a box that's sealed by the bank. In summary, we are facing a situation where the government has a proven plan to revalue gold and use it to stabilize the financial system. The banks are prepared for it, and they're ready to absorb the massive shift in value. But for ordinary citizens holding paper claims to gold, the outcome could be disastrous. If you don't own physical gold in your possession, you may miss out on the coming revaluation, and when the trap closes, you'll be left holding worthless paper. Be sure to understand the difference between owning real gold and just holding a claim to it. The government has come a long way since 1933. Back then, they physically sent agents to banks to confiscate gold, a slow and messy process. Today, in 2025, they don't need a representative in the room. With advancements in technology, they now have the blockchain, centralized digital reporting, and facial recognition systems integrated into every bank lobby. The moment a new executive order triggers the National Economic Emergency Clause, banking software will lock you out. Your safe deposit box will be flagged, and to access it, you will be required to sign a declaration under penalty of perjury, affirming that you do not possess prohibited monetary metals. If your gold is in the banking system, even in a locked metal box that you have the key to it is no longer yours. It belongs to the government, and you're just paying a storage fee until they decide to seize it. What makes this scenario possible is the government's newly established legal framework. They have already defined hoarding not as saving, but as an act of economic sabotage against the national security of the United States. And unlike the violent raids many expect, the government's approach is far more subtle. They understand that swift, drastic action could create a black market and cause chaos. Instead, they will employ a four-phase strategy designed to slowly strip you of your wealth voluntarily, step by step, until you are left with no choice but to comply. Phase 1. The Patriotic Buyback. In this first phase, after the Strategic Reserve Framework is finalized, the Treasury will announce a program to buy gold from American citizens. This will be presented as an effort to strengthen the dollar and protect national security. The government will offer you the current market price for your gold, potentially adding a 5% premium to sweeten the deal. They will make it sound patriotic, like selling your gold is a duty to help pay down the national debt. The idea will be wrapped in a sense of national pride, but the reality is far darker. Those who view gold merely as an investment will sell without thinking twice, oblivious to the fact that they are exchanging a lifeline for a sinking ship. Phase 2. Regulatory encirclement. Once the voluntary selling slows down, the government will tighten the noose. They will introduce new regulations, framed under the guise of anti-money laundering (AML) measures. These changes will lower the reporting thresholds for gold transactions. Right now, dealers are required to report large cash transactions, but soon, any private sale of gold above $600 could trigger a digital 1099 form. Gold will not be made illegal, but it will become nearly impossible to trade privately. The government will begin to build a database of who owns what. And if you've purchased gold from a major dealer in the last 5 years, you're already on that list. Phase 3. Taxation by inflation. Phase 3 will introduce what is essentially taxation by stealth. Congress will pass a windfall profits tax or an unrealized gains tax, specifically targeting precious metals. The argument will be that since gold prices are rising due to government policy, the government deserves a share. Imagine holding gold that appreciates by 20%, only to be hit with a 40% tax on that gain. This will make it increasingly expensive to hold onto gold, effectively bleeding you dry with taxes, fees, and levies. Many people will feel forced to sell just to stop the financial pressure. Phase 4. The crisis trigger. The final phase is the crisis trigger. This could be sparked by a national emergency, a war, a cyber attack, or even a bond market freeze. Under the cover of chaos, the government will issue a mandatory acquisition order, requiring you to turn in your gold at a preset official price. You'll have 90 days to comply, or you'll be labeled a criminal. By the time Phase 4 is reached, the government will have already acquired most of the public's gold through the first 3 phases. The trap doesn't snap shut all at once, it tightens gradually until you have no option but to hand over your assets. The most dangerous misconception about this executive order is that it's just an accounting trick with no real victims. Politicians will tell you that by revaluing gold, they are simply unlocking value to pay off the debt. But there's no such thing as a free lunch in economics. You cannot erase $37 trillion in debt without someone, somewhere, paying the price. In this scenario, the people paying the price will be you. This isn't just a tax you'll pay on April 15th. It's a tax you'll pay every time you swipe your credit card, buy groceries, or pay your bills. Here's how this theft will work. When the Treasury prints $5 trillion in new certificates and the Federal Reserve injects that liquidity into the system, the amount of money chasing goods will explode. However, the amount of goods, houses, oil, food will remain the same. The result will be catastrophic devaluation of the currency. As a result, the dollar's purchasing power will plummet, and inflation will skyrocket. The winners in this scenario are the U.S. government, which will benefit from the devaluation of its $37 trillion debt. The government will pay back its bondholders with devalued dollars, effectively wiping out a massive portion of its debt burden. The banks will also come out ahead. The revaluation of gold will heal their balance sheets, which were previously stretched thin. The insiders, the wealthy elite who moved their capital into hard assets, physical metals, and foreign currencies before the crisis, will benefit the most. They will preserve their wealth and profit during the devaluation of the dollar. The losers, however, will be the middle class. Your salary is paid in dollars, and when inflation hits 20% or 30% a year, your wages will not keep up. You will work harder, but your standard of living will collapse. Those who saved responsibly will see their money evaporate. If you have $100,000 in the bank, you'll still see $100,000 on your screen, but it will only be worth what $20,000 buys today. You will be robbed of your labor, your time, and your efforts. Pension funds and retirees will suffer too. Pension funds own government bonds, and when the government devalues those bonds through inflation, pension funds will become insolvent. Retirees may receive their pension checks, but those checks won't cover basic expenses like electricity or healthcare. This is called financial repression. It is the deliberate policy of transferring wealth from savers, those who trusted the system, to debtors, the government. The most critical asset you have right now is not gold, not Bitcoin, and certainly not dollars. It is time. But time is running out faster than you think. The infrastructure for this strategy is already in place. The executive order has been signed. The banks are Basel III compliant. The trap has been set. The only thing missing is the crisis trigger. Once it is pulled, the window to act will close in a matter of days, not months. If your wealth is entirely within the United States, it is within reach of a single executive order. You need to move a portion of your assets outside of the U.S. to protect yourself from this impending crisis. Switzerland and Singapore are considered the gold standards for this type of diversification. Both countries have legal systems that do not recognize U.S. confiscation orders. In Switzerland, allocated gold storage is considered property, not a financial contract, and is protected by centuries of privacy law. In Singapore, the Freeport zones offer similar protections, with no capital gains tax and no reporting requirements to U.S. authorities for non-financial assets. By moving a portion of your wealth to these jurisdictions, you aren't hiding your assets. You are insuring them against the political risks associated with a bankrupt government. This is the only way to ensure that when the revaluation of gold occurs, you will be a beneficiary, not a victim. The government is about to pull off the greatest accounting trick in history. They will turn $11 billion worth of gold into $5 trillion to save the bond market. But in doing so, they will devalue the currency, robbing you of your wealth. Don't be collateral damage in their war on debt. The time to act is now. I will be closely tracking the Treasury's daily statements and watching for the regulatory changes that signal Phase 2 has begun. If you want to stay ahead of this, you need to watch the signals closely. When you see the Treasury lower the reporting threshold for private transactions, that is the warning shot. When you see headlines about modernizing the cross-border movement of assets, that is the gate closing. And when you see national economic emergency scroll across your screen, it will already be too late.